feet at your ceiling. It was like this the whole time. What, dude? This thing is terrifying. That's another level, man.
What's going on, everyone? Dalt here with LeeCparts in the Scrap Life Garage, and as you can see behind me, this video is going to be about the R8. More R8 content. We're going to have more draggy times. The car is on setting 2 right now, and we're only going to be turning it up from here. So we had to get the performance numbers for setting 2. I ran it at race motive, as most of you have probably seen. We're going to go over the time that I ran there on setting 2 versus the car on pump gas, and we're going to have a few more reaction videos, and then also, as you can see, we're diving into doing some of the aero on the front end of the car. So we're going to jump right into it here.
So 1100 horsepower, the car went right about 170 mile an hour in the third of a mile at Pocono, roughly starting at 65. And I say roughly, kind of like estimated, because we didn't have verified start speeds. So the car went real high 160s, again, without verifying what we were starting at. So I think 170 is a pretty safe number, 170 even. On setting 1, the car did a 4.65 draggy 60 to 130. So on setting 2, we don't know exactly how much horsepower it is. Underground just gave us the high and gave us the low. So the middle 2 settings, we don't know what they actually make. I would estimate, based on the boost map that I'm going to show you guys, because the car is boost by gear, it jumps up 5 psi, as you can see, in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. So I'm going to guess the car was probably somewhere in the 13 to 1400 horsepower range. And on that setting, the car did 184 miles an hour at the third of a mile race at Pocono with verified start speeds of under 65 miles an hour. So that is very accurate data right there. That was a race motive event. The best we were able to get the car to do on the street, 60 to 130, was 4.1. And we were having traction issues. We couldn't get enough heat in the tires, and the air temperature is starting to drop enough that it's hard to get it hot enough for the tires to really stick. So we really think that can drop down further. We think we can probably get that into the high 3s. But that at least gives you an idea that it dropped half a second, 60 to 130, kind of struggling for traction the entire time. So now we have VP import in the car, which is good for setting 3 and setting 4. So setting 3 jumps the boost pressure another 5 psi. Setting 4 increases an additional 3 on top of that for 4th, 5th, and 6th gear. So I don't think the 60 to 130 time is going to change at all with setting 4. It's possible that it will if we can actually get it to get enough traction. But setting 3, I'm expecting it to really jump. We're thinking that this thing should probably go about 3.5, 60 to 130 on setting 3, if we can get it to hook up.
How much power is it right now? 1100. Just under.
That's awesome. Yeah, 4th is wild. Yeah. It feels like it's taken off in 4th gear. Oh, yeah. Holy shit. Ready? It spun pretty good when it still spun a little bit, but when I took him for a ride, it was fighting a little bit more. So it's getting a little bit heat in there.
Damn, it feels good.
It doesn't stop. No, so it's Because I've flown in airplanes that were slower. Thanks, man.
Yeah, dude.
Come right back.
Yeah. Ready? It spun. It spun that time, damn it. So straight and so good.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine the people that run this kind of power in just like some shit box that they built in their garage.
Ready?
$95, 90 degrees maybe?
Yeah, they probably need to be like, what?
They need to be tacky. They need to feel tacky.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it was hooking up like that.
yeah, that's true.
Crazy.
Sure. Final thoughts.
It's wild.
Okay, enough said. 2 words, enough said.
So as you saw in the intro, I have some cardboard mocked up here that we're going to be trying to figure out some hopefully improvements for the front end of the car. I will start by saying that I have a very basic understanding of vehicle aerodynamics. I am not by any stretch of the imagination some sort of engineer. So what I am operating off of is basic principles of, aerodynamics around a car. And we're going to hope that the improvements that we make will actually work. They will be tested. If it doesn't work, then we'll go back to the drawing board. What I have mocked up here out of cardboard is kind of a just rough idea that I had in my head when we first were building this car of ultimately what I wanted to do with the aerodynamics on the front of the car. And this design, I kind of drew inspiration from the 488 Pistas that have a similar type of design to this. They're, I think, a little bit further forward, but this is kind of the rough idea of what we're going to try to do to get some air flowing through the front of this car a little bit better, and hope that it helps out with the wind resistance and gives us a little bit better performance times. When air is moving, fast moving air is the lowest pressure. When air slows down, becomes stagnant, runs into something, that's where you get high pressure areas. So the underside of the car being completely smooth means that it is the lowest pressure that we have around the car, which does multiple things. It kind of acts as a vacuum where it actually pulls the car down to the road, which again keeps it stable, but it also makes it so whatever is going on above the car is higher pressure, which means that it holds the car to the ground, which again is why the car just doesn't want to just take off in its, raw, unaerodynamic form like this. But what you run into is, especially probably back here at the firewall, is you have the air that comes up just runs right into the firewall. And that's what we're trying to smooth out here. So the idea is that the air going through the radiator opening now there will be side pieces here that I don't have mocked up quite yet, and that's going to force the air through the radiator opening and then ultimately come out through this vent right here. And that is also going to help. We're going to change some of the radiator, the design of the shroud a little bit. I have some rubber flaps that we're going to be putting in to hopefully eliminate any lift that we may be generating at this point through the radiator shroud, since we have those flat pieces right there that are just a spot where air can't go anywhere, and ultimately that will create lift on the front end, which is not what we want. But all the air coming through will then come out, because the air that comes over the front end of the car here, what it does is essentially when you get to probably about this bar, it doesn't hit this and go right like that. It kind of creates like an arcing motion back towards the windshield. And that's how a cowl hood works, is because the air comes and it hits the windshield, and it's extremely high pressure at the windshield because it hits and it stops. And on cars with cowl hoods, into the engine bay is lower pressure. So the air moves from a high pressure to a low pressure, and that's why a cowl hood functions like it does. So what we're trying to do with the front end here is we're trying to get the air to move up to jump over to get to the cowl, so that way what it does is it kind of creates a vacuum as the air's coming out. It wants to pull the air out of here, and again, only improves the airs or the front end aerodynamics on the car. Now, the one thing that we're going to have to be a little bit careful of, and I'll show you from the side here, you can see that the bend in our bar starts right about here. Because what you can do is if you have something that has too big of an opening, the air, instead of wanting to go over it, will go into it. And then you have the exact opposite effect, like I was just saying. It will essentially act as a cowl hood where the air reverses. And then what that would mean is that we wouldn't have good flow through the radiator. We'd have really poor aerodynamics, and the car would probably start to overheat. So I'm hoping that because this is slightly behind here, and then we'll probably do some sort of raised edge on this here, which you see on a lot of vented hoods. When you come up to it, it's flared up. And what that last little bit does is any air that is down low, it would just shoot right over top of the opening. So I think this is about as big of an opening as we can get. And hopefully that will be enough. We did some kind of rough calculations with area for the amount coming through the radiator opening right there, and then this opening here. And this opening is roughly 3/4 the size of what's coming through the radiator. So hopefully that will be enough. Again, we aren't putting this car in a wind tunnel to actually test this. We're going to kind of, at this point we're not, ultimately we'd like to. So we're just going to kind of do it, and we're going to see how it works, and then what changes we need to make. I already had something that was roughly the diameter or the radius that I needed, and it was a 20-inch wheel that was going to the scrap pile anyway. So I have a pair of them back to back. We clamped it overnight, heated it a couple times. No idea if this is actually going to work, but we're about to unclamp it and see if it holds at least some of this shape, because I don't need the full bend out of this, but I need most of it. Oh, I like the initial. Some of it. Not a lot.
I mean, it's going in the right direction.
Yeah,
so.
I was going to say, that's actually, I was hoping for a little bit more.
Yeah.
It has some. Now, the other question is, I see it bends a little bit easier, too. Huh. Okay, well, at least it's something. But it's definitely not enough. Alright, so the wheel trick did actually work out. I was able to bend this a little bit further, basically just with my hands, kind of wedging it against my body. So having it bent around the wheels worked out good because it started us in the right direction. Now I'm going to start working. We're going to get that mounted up. I have my tape holes lined up there in the top corner. What we're going to do is we're just going to, because what it does is it rests right under into this lip. So we're just going to drill and tap a hole right there, and we're actually going to use these button head screws that are actually from the car originally. This is what all the underside aero is held on with. You know, other things in the car held on with it also, but these are nice because they're super low profile, and that's why the whole underside of the car uses them to keep the underside of the car smooth. So we're going to get the back piece of the hood drilled, and then line it up with those holes there, get them tapped, and then we can get the hood in place. And what I'm also going to be working on is starting on some of the other pieces here. So the first one that I know that I had a scrap piece left over from, this was actually just a scrap piece from when I was cutting that out of the piece of aluminum, which is why it's very important that you always want to start with your large pieces, because sometimes you end up with a piece that is suitable for one of your other parts. So this is actually going to go right back there, and I have marked my width, so that way we're going to get this cut and we can get that put in there. And now why we want to do that, because it's going to get a hood put on top of it. That's what the front section of the hood is going to be. But what I was explaining to you guys, we don't want any air pockets. So if this is up here, this whole area in between where my hand is right now on the bottom side of this bar, and then where the hood would come on the top side of the bar, would generate a spot that could have a pocket that would be stagnant air, which would ultimately create lift. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim that area down. We're going to mount a piece on the bottom side of these tabs right here, and that way it's going to cut down on that, and then we'll tape all around it to seal it up real good. So we're going to go ahead and get that cut, and we'll get the back piece of the hood mounted. All right, so we have the front section of the hood cut. Now that the rear section is, you know, basically mounted in place. I have 2 screws through the chassis. We still have to figure out something for the middle here. There's a little bit of movement in the middle, so we're either going to put something underneath of it, you know, weather stripping wise to space it up, or we're going to come up with like an actual mount underneath of there. And then the bottom, I also need to do the same thing. Right now it's just kind of wedged in place between that bolt and then the radiator, but ultimately we want to maybe use like this mounting piece right here and create, so you can see it better on the other side, the mounting bracket for the radiator to hold that, because right now it has a little bit of movement, but it can't move around a ton. So that gives us, you know, our basic shape for it. And we have the front piece in place. It has some extra all over it. The idea with the front here, because the bar is much further back, the idea with this is that this is actually going to come and get rounded around the bar, so it attaches down onto the lower side. So I have where previously where, you know, I thought it would end marked, and then we have some extra left in it with a, you know, kind of crude cut. And what we'll do is I need to get the right angle in right here to go inside that bar, and then once we get the top attached, I can start kind of shaping that around. And right here, this is the outside of the bar in the same way that this is, and what we're going to end up doing is putting some cuts in this here, since it has a radius this way, bending it down, and then I'll probably have Josh weld it, and that will be some attachment points on the side of the bar right there, and finish boxing in that area that's open right now. So what we need to do is, you can see this thing is shooting up in the air. We need to get it to bend down like so, and as you saw with the using the wheels for the back piece, which put us in the right direction, then when we were able to hand bend it, what I need to do is I need to give this thing a start. It really only needs a relatively minor amount of bend in it. So what I did is I went ahead and marked the back side where it starts lifting off, and we're going to kind of do a kind of ghetto, you know, sheet metal brake here using a 2x4, because that'll be a little bit softer edge, because I don't want a hard edge in it. I want it to be a soft kind of radius. So we're going to see if maybe we can screw a 2x4 down to one of our benches and bend it off of that. So we're going to go see if this will work. More hillbilly engineering at its finest. All right, so we got our makeshift sheet metal brake set up. Like I said, I have it screwed in to the table here, so that way it's nice and sandwiched. We have this as squared up as best as we can get it, and we're gonna see if this is gonna work. I mean, in theory it should. Either that or I'm gonna look like a pretty big idiot. So we're gonna give it a shot here. I got my extra piece here, and we're just gonna start seeing if we can bend it. Alright, so believe it or not, it actually worked. So we're going to take it back over to the car. I know I'm not expecting it to be 100% perfect as far as how uniform it is. You saw it was actually bending a little bit easier if I just kind of used my hands versus spreading it across the whole thing with the 2x4. And that's probably just because obviously the surface area is a little bit smaller, and with me kind of doing this in a, you know, not so proper fashion, I don't have the force just with me pushing on it. So we'll get it on the car, see if that's enough bend for it, and hopefully it fits. All right, to my amazement, we pretty well nailed it pretty much the first try. So I got a nice, you know, bend on it. It's basically right in the middle of that radius there. You can see that we're sticking up a little bit, but I think it probably would have been pretty hard to mimic that bend as gradual as it is with what I have at my disposal. So we can pull that down flat, and that kind of gives you an idea of what the opening is going to look like on this thing. And again, these dotted lines here on the side is I'm going to have to put a cut right through there. These are going to get folded 90 degrees over, and that way we'll have an attachment point on the side of the bar. And same thing down here at the bottom, I'm going to attach it, and we're going to start hammering this around so that way we can attach it and it rolls around the front edge of the car. Yeah, so the one thing that I've been doing to just keep coming back and double checking is I have my center lines here, and as you can see, this is lining up pretty darn well everywhere, right where it is right now, being totally center. So it looks like the one area that we're going to have to make an adjustment on is up here at the top. You can see this one is cut a little bit short, and this one is about where I wanted it. So this one's just going to have to get trimmed back a little bit, and that's not the biggest deal in the world. And when it gets attached, we'll just have to do something there to kind of smooth that out. All right, you can see we got one side bent a little bit more around than the other, and you can see how this is starting to overlap here. So we're going to get a little bit more cut out of the middle there, and I think I'm also going to do 1 or 2 cuts a little bit further out, so that way this sits down a little bit. But what this should hopefully do is give you guys kind of the first glimpse of the, you know, the method to the madness here, in hopes that this will give us a nice rounded front area, and then I'll have to have Josh go back, weld that back in, and we'll grind it smooth. But it is coming along relatively nicely. I'm actually surprised. So now we have our 90 degrees put in the side here, and you can see I kind of have, you know, slightly angled cuts, and right now they're not pulled together, but when we put this thing back on the car and it gets some more of an arc put in it, they will tighten up real quick, and that will hopefully give us enough clearance in order to make that work. So we're going to go ahead and do the other side and get it back on the car and see how it looks. Alrighty, so this is the full kind of rough idea in place. It still has some of the finish work that needs to be done on it. Again, we're gonna, you know, go through, tack weld these. You can see some of them tightened up, some of them there's still a big gap, so we'll weld that back up. And then I also need to get the height correct, so that way we can bolt it to the bar behind it. And then same thing here, you can see how right here this tapers down behind, where we really only need a spot that's right on the bar there to attach it. I do think I'm going to end up having to put one of the like button head bolts just like that right down through there on top of the bar just to hold it in place. And then the other thing that I want to do is I want to see if I can get maybe even like a bead roller for like aluminum tubing, and see if I can just clamp this edge just to give it a little flare up to really shoot the air over top of it. But it also might basically do the same thing how the air comes up right here, where you can see kind of the height that we're working with there, where the back piece isn't that much higher than here. So we might be in good enough shape. But same thing, like I said, actually you can see that that kind of tightens up and bends up when you put that down, and then that'll have to get held in place. So there's a little bit more on it, but again, that's kind of the rough idea in metal, and you can see kind of what we're trying to do to smooth out the front end here. Either later in this video or in another video, we'll actually take it out when I get everything mounted up on it. We'll take it out and we'll probably just tape some string to it and see if it actually is going to be relatively functional. We'll probably try and do a 60 to 130 on the car again too, with the panels in place once I get everything boxed in. And that'll let us know if it's actually doing anything, or you know, if it just looks kind of cool and it's not. I mean, if it's not hurting anything, then it will probably just stay on the car. But I'd really like to think that it is actually going to help out with getting the front end of this car to be a little bit more slick. So one area that we've identified as a potential problem area is here on the radiator shroud. And I have marked up here on the side, I have the fan removed. We are going to use a series of rubber flaps. And these are going to go where I have outlined here. There's 2 spots to pop rivet them, and then we're going to drill 3 half-inch size holes for some air to escape. And what that's for is, as this thing is generating or traveling at high speed, any air that is being trapped on the side pockets that isn't being pulled through the main opening there, we want to let that escape, but we also want the shroud to be able to work when the car is sitting still and use the full radiator to dissipate the heat that is coming through the coolant lines. So what this does is essentially acts as like a little trap door. I'm either going to have to drill holes for them or trim them, so we'll flip it over for the time being. And at speed, because of the half-inch holes, this will open up like so and allow air to pass through. But when the car is sitting still, the fan will turn on and it will actually pull it shut and it'll seal it back up, so that way it functions the exact same. So we're hoping with the car turned all the way up that this will help to get some air out of the front end. When we box everything in and do the full front hood and ducted radiator section, it will definitely be necessary, because right now if this area, you know, has stagnant air, the rest of the air can go out any other direction. But if we have this boxed in and everything's being forced through the radiator, then it has to have somewhere to go. So this is kind of preemptive. I think it should probably help a little bit just in the runs that we're going to do this weekend coming up, but definitely when we get everything boxed in, it should help. So I have a big old flat piece of steel behind this that we're going to drill into, so that way we don't hit the radiator at all. And like I said, we're just going to go to town here. All right, so the first one is done here. It is not sitting as flat as I'd like. I figured out that basically I have to be like tensioning it as I'm marking my spots for the pop rivets. We also modified the design a little bit, so we have 5 holes behind each flap. So it looks a little bit like Swiss cheese, but again, hopefully when the fan turns on, this will get kind of suctioned down just like that, and it'll really allow the fan to do all of the work when it's needed. But when the fan isn't on and this thing's at high speed, this guy will flap open like that and let a whole bunch of air through. So just rough calculations with the area of using 3 on each one, doing the rough math on it was almost 9 inches of area, and then I just added 2 more. So you're essentially going to be looking at probably 15, 16 inches of area just by drilling all of these half-inch size holes. So that should be pretty effective. I f***ed up. Literally the one thing that I couldn't do happened. I had that plate of steel that was there to protect from something like this happening, and somehow I managed to put a little tiny nick in one of these tubes. I honestly don't know how it happened. It had to have just kicked a piece of steel out from beside whatever it did. But I put a little nick in it, and we have an event that we're supposed to be loading the car for here in a couple hours. So went to the store, got some putty kind of epoxy stuff that's designed for aluminum that may work here. Just kind of crimp the tube back shut. We tried having a local guy weld it. I've been literally scrambling around for an hour or two now trying to come up with a solution here. We didn't have high hopes that that would work, and unfortunately it didn't. So went ahead, like I said, we cleared out the little bit of fins right there, pinched the tube together in hopes that this little bit of epoxy here will just seal around it. So this stuff needs about an hour to harden, and we're gonna just see if maybe we get lucky. I already talked to Josh. We already got another core on order because I'm never going to be comfortable with that for a long period of time. But if it holds and we can get the car to the event this weekend, do a couple passes with it, and you know, again, are confident that it's going to hold, then you know, we're going to try it out so we don't have to miss an event. So it is the next day here, and I had to, you know, just kind of walk away and go home. But as you guys can see, this thing is still leaking. Unfortunately, the little quick, hopefully temporary repair for this thing did not work, and we are not going to be racing this weekend, which Carrington is rightfully not too happy about. And you know, hindsight's always 20/20, but looking back, the risk reward of doing that the day before we were going to be packing up for an event probably wasn't the best idea. So definitely a lesson learned. We're going to miss a weekend of racing. We've been planning this stuff going into the fall when the weather was getting to be ideal for a long time now, so it's very disappointing to not be able to make it to the Slipstream event. We're going to be doing our best this week. Not even doing our best. We're going to make sure we get the race motive this weekend coming up. That's the big one that we've been planning on getting to with everything that's going to be going down. You know, the car is still going to be on its highest setting, and we're going to try and get this thing to 200 mile an hour. So this week we will get with Josh. He already has a core on order for us. We're going to get the end tank swapped over to the new one. We'll finish modifying the shroud, that way it actually does what we want it to do. And we'll get this thing back on the road and ready for business for this weekend coming up for race motive. So again, thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate the support, everybody. Continue to comment, like, subscribe, you know, all that good stuff. And we'll see you for the next video.